All right, well, I appreciate you being here. On behalf of the House Democratic Caucus, we've got a few comments for this week. I guess I want to lead by saying that in my 9 years here in my going on 9 years here at the state capitol, there have been few weeks that have been more embarrassing for the state of Oklahoma, and in particular for the Oklahoma legislature, than this week. At the beginning of session, my caucus made our announcement and said that we were going to be focused like a laser on issues that affect the middle class in Oklahoma. Issues like funding properly public education, health care, and public safety. That's our goal and that's our mission, and then we've been a caucus focused on that, focusing on improving the middle class. But unfortunately, the majority party in the first couple of weeks, and in particular this week, instead of focusing on issues that really do affect and improve and benefit the middle class, they focused on radical right-wing fringe elements like banning AP classes or punishing county courthouses that follow Supreme Court and federal law. At the end of the day, those things only serve to embarrass the state of Oklahoma, but don't do anything to improve the state's economy, to improve the state's image, or to improve the state's middle class. And we've got to put a stop to it. We're hoping that the Speaker, the Pro Tem, and the Governor will encourage their membership to come back to sanity, come back to the middle, and focus on issues that really matter to people in their lives. For example, when we talk about trying to improve public education, we talk about trying to work with our teachers, just like the current superintendent does. Let's work hand in hand with our teachers to make education better in Oklahoma. What do the Republicans in the House say? Well, they say instead of working with teachers, they want to punish teachers. Matter of fact, the first bill that affects public education in any way heard on the House floor this session didn't improve public education, didn't empower teachers. It weakened their ability to organize and to communicate and fight for their kids and fight for themselves. That's a shame. Does nothing to help the middle class. Matter of fact, what they did is that legislation that passed out yesterday from the House of Representatives by Representative Tom Newell only served to hurt middle class families and teachers in the state of Oklahoma. And so we're hoping that in the coming weeks we can get away from these fringe tangential issues and really focus on issues that matter to the families in the state of Oklahoma. If not, I'm afraid that we'll be back on The View and on Fox News and MSNBC talking about how ridiculous some of our current legislators and their ideas are. That doesn't serve the state well, and we need to put those things aside and deal with issues that really matter. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Doesn't the Speaker have some obligation, though, to these members who truly believe in some of these ideas that you characterize as radical, but I mean, they truly believe in these things?
No, the Speaker's obligation, in my opinion, is not to any particular member. The Speaker's obligation is to govern and lead the House of Representatives in a way that moves the state forward, that makes the state look good, that improves the state's quality of life for our citizens, our children. And so he understands that. Hearing bills in committee that would ban AP classes that many students from across the state of Oklahoma have used to get basically free or low-cost college course credit is not moving the state forward. He has no obligation to hear radical, crazy ideas. I mean, if he were under any obligation to hear legislation, I've got a bill that would help state employees and giving them guaranteed maternity leave for state employees, for the women in the state who shouldn't have to choose between feeding their baby and by having to go back to work or being able to stay home and care for them. That would actually help affect and improve middle-class families, improve the lives of our state employees who are sorely underfunded. They haven't heard that bill, but instead they hear a bill that would ban AP classes or that would punish county clerks for following federal law or Supreme Court jurisprudence. If he's really under an obligation to do anything like that, there are a myriad of other bills out there that he could choose that would move the state forward and wouldn't put us on the front page of the funny papers.
And wasn't there some legislation that came up that would provide like a huge amount to education, which there's that money, no identification was made on where that money would come from. Is that another example of kind of wrong-headed legislation that it sounds like a good cause, and it certainly would bring a responsible court in a lot of people, but as a practical matter, how could you do that this year?
Well, no, Rick, you're right. We have an obligation as elected officials to shoot straight with people, to be honest with them. They understand that we have a $611 million budget hole thanks to their fiscal irresponsibility, the way they've run their tax credit system in the ground, the way they're giving away what will amount to $120 to $150 million tax cut at the same time we're cutting public education and healthcare. They have a responsibility to shoot straight with folks, and so to pass legislation out that would give this false sense of hope to teachers and educators to say, oh, we're going to give you a pay raise, or at least to make them think that there's even a possibility in this year when they know full well that it's not going to happen. That's simply pandering, and it's not being honest with our teachers. They need to be honest with their teachers and in a way to say what they really care about isn't about giving them new money or new pay raises, because they haven't given them pay raises in years. What they care about is neutering their ability to organize, because that's what you saw. That was their first priority on the House floor. And I dare say that even if there's a bill, even if that bill that would increase teacher salaries comes through the House, it won't have a title on it, just like 2642 didn't have a title on it last year with Lee Denny's bill. They all got to go back home and say they voted to increase funding for education by hundreds of millions of dollars, at least technically they did, but in reality, practically speaking, they didn't give $1 new to public education with that bill.
But is there a theme that you see here with ideological bills that come through committee, are voted on by people who know that they'll go nowhere or may not even get into the chamber, but they're done not because good legislation needs to move through, but they're done for other political reasons?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, the political games that are played with people's lives in this building. I promise you, there are many members of the majority party, of the Republican caucus, that come to me and other members of my team and say, you know, it's really embarrassing that we're having to vote on this, and hopefully if it does get heard on the floor, hopefully the Senate won't hear it. Well, that's bad. That's bad legislating. If you don't like the bill, if you realize it's an embarrassment for the state of Oklahoma, for example, the AP bill, there is zero excuse for the 11 Republicans, many of whom have incredible histories when it comes to educating our kids in their prior careers. There is zero excuse for them to support legislation like that, even if they thought, well, it may not get heard on the floor or it won't get heard in the Senate. They have an obligation to stand up to bad legislation and kill it there. And just imagine if those elected officials, those Republicans on the House committee, had voted that bill down, how the press would be different today. They would be saying House Democrats and Republicans come together to kill bad, radical, fringe legislation, and that would be the story, instead of all the news outlets calling my members and asking them to come sit on national news television shows to talk about how embarrassing it is that bill not only got filed, but got heard and passed out of a committee, signed off on by people who supposedly care about public education.
Scott, are they giving you any direction on what revolving funds are you going to do, about what revolving funds are going to be tapped, or how they're going to bridge the?
They haven't come to us and said, here are the specific revolving funds that we're going to look at. But what you see now, I've heard from several different agency directors that are doing their best to try to find a way to protect their revolving accounts, because they were robbed last year, or they're afraid of being robbed of them this year, and those monies are set to go for core functions of that particular agency, and now they're trying their best to either use the money now before appropriations and budget folks can get their hands on it, or trying to find a way to encumber it so that it can't be accessed in the future. So that's what I'm hearing now, less about which specific funds are going to be tapped and more about how those state agencies are trying to protect their what few resources they have.
Can you give an example?
Not off the top of my head, I can't. And the couple of the conversations that I had they didn't ask me to share them with folks, but they did. I mean, they were there. Oh, and one of them, one that I know of specifically, that wasn't a conversation with me, was that this was discussed in one of the budget committee hearings when they talked about the trauma fund, and they basically said, you know, that money that was robbed last year was supposed to be used for cases like the Moore tornado, and if you came through and you had healthcare providers that could not get fully reimbursed from insurance companies, so the hospitals and the doctors in the Moore community, for example, if they couldn't get fully reimbursed from insurance companies for what they did to care for those people in Moore, then the state's trauma care fund would come in and help cover up some of the cost. Well, they said in the hearing, in the budget hearing, said, well, from now on, we're not going to be just sitting on it waiting for the biggest disaster to hit, trying to be as prudent as possible. We're going to be giving that thing out every month or every other month. Whatever money we've got in it, if people make an application for it, we're going to be moving those dollars out, which would still serve the purpose that the fund was created for. But what it does do is it means that if we have a real huge crisis like we had with the Moore tornado, then that money may be gone, or there may be fewer dollars in it, because the fiscal mismanagement of this leadership has forced the health department to use that trauma care fund in a way that in the past they didn't use it for, and at the end of the day, it's not good for the average Oklahoman. So,
didn't the AG say they couldn't raid that fund anymore?
Well, the AG said that, but Preston Dorflinger said that he came right back and said, well, no, but we can. He read that somehow. He read something between the lines of the opinion to say that he was still able to do that because the fees were collected for a different purpose or they weren't using the money that was derived from fees. I'm not sure how he justified it, but at the end of the day, it's unconstitutional. And we think that what you'll find too in this year when they come back in and rate other revolving funds, you'll have my caucus will take a good look at it like we did before. Agencies will take a good look at what they do, and we'll be back either before the court or back before the AG trying to protect the Constitution, make sure they follow the law, because they sure didn't last time.
Do you see the rainy day fund being tapped?
I do. I think the rainy day fund will be tapped. I think they can tap up to $200 million of it without any vote on the House floor. If they want to go above and beyond that, they have to get either a 2/3 majority or if the governor calls for an emergency, or they have to go for a 75% vote if the governor doesn't call for an emergency in order to tap additional funds. I don't foresee them going beyond the $200 million and trying to get this vote to get it passed. I think it'd be difficult for them to get that vote passed because you'll have folks on both sides of the aisle who disagree with what they're trying to do with it. So I think they'll probably tap $200 million. But they need to answer, the Speaker, the Governor, the pro tem of the Senate, they need to answer for how you can make an argument in the state of the state when the governor said, just last year we took in more money in the state of Oklahoma than we ever have in state history, her words. But yet we're cutting income taxes and tapping the rainy day fund at the same time. I would argue, I'm not a historian by any means, but I would argue that it's got to be one of the, if not the first time, one of the few times in state history that the rainy day fund will be tapped at a time when you see growth revenue. And why is that? It's because of the fiscal mismanagement over the last 4 to 10 years since the Republicans have been in control. If you look at the tax credit explosion, that's their fault. You look at the tax cuts, that's their fault. All of that sits at their feet. The way they've budgeted, the way they've managed this budget, it's all their responsibility. And so to say, hey, the economy's doing great and try to claim credit for it, at the same time you're having to tap the rainy day fund so that you can protect education from getting further cuts, that's mind-numbingly ignorant, in my opinion.
One thing she's been saying a lot is the pass-through money, the off-the-top stuff, has grown so much that the legislature doesn't have as big a pot as it once did to allocate. So what's going to happen there? Will there be a raid on these kind of off-the-top funds, maybe transportation?
I seriously doubt that they'll touch transportation because that would be trying to have their cake and eat it too. She likes to go out and talk about how they've improved funding for transportation. To turn around and then raid that fund would be hypocritical on her part. I don't see them doing that. But then again, it goes back to their fiscal mismanagement. Certainly, transportation needed new dollars, and I supported the idea of trying to get new money to it. But when you look at it all as one big package, tax cuts, off-the-top money, an expansion or explosion in tax credit usage, all of that has been part of what they believed was going to be this huge economic boom for the state of Oklahoma that would bring in so much money to general revenue that we could afford to pay for education, healthcare, and public safety, and that's just not the case. And what I want to point out too, as a minority leader, is you hear the governor now at times try to blame the situation that we have on the falling prices of oil. Well, make no mistake about it, when oil was $100 a barrel or better, states like North Dakota were increasing public education funding by 23%, more than any other state in the country. So when it's $100 a barrel, North Dakota was increasing their funding for public education by 23%. And Oklahoma, during that same time, when oil was $100 a barrel, were cutting funding for education by 23%, more than any other state in the country. And so when times were great in the oil and gas industry, the governor and Republican leaders were cutting funding for education. Now that the price of oil is around $50 a barrel, she wants to say, well, that's the reason we must continue cutting. Now, one must ask the governor and Republican leaders, why is it when we had $100 a barrel oil, we were cutting funding for core functions of government when other states were investing? It's because of their fiscal mismanagement over the last 4 or 5 years, and they have to answer for it.
Could you just a little more on the transportation? That was a Republican-led initiative. Henry agreed to it. Our roads and bridges were terrible, and we did make a commitment to invest in infrastructure, and it has, we've reduced the number of structurally deficient bridges. Yes, it's caused a bit of a pinch in terms of appropriate, available appropriations, but overall, do you think that was a good investment? I mean,
no, we do. I mean, we absolutely need to invest in core functions of government. Transportation, healthcare, public safety, and education are those core functions of government that desperately needed it. And I would hope, I guess, that when the $60 million annually, when we finally reach the cap of $500 million, whatever it is, when we finally reach the cap on transportation funding and that we stop adding those new dollars to it, I would hope that we would capture that money and put it into another core function of a government like public education, because our roads and bridges are just as important as our kids. And we shouldn't be in a situation where we have to pick winners and losers between kids, health care, and transportation. You can't have a good state that has good schools but bad roads and bad health care. You can't have a good state that has bad schools but great roads. That doesn't make sense. You have to have, all parts have to work together. And what you see under the fiscal mismanagement of this leadership is an emphasis on one part while the other several parts, healthcare, public safety, and education, sort of wither away. And that creates the environment that we're in now, where businesses look here and say, hey, we need more graduates. The governor agrees that we need more graduates, but because of her fiscal mismanagement, we haven't been able to put any new dollars into the Complete College America program that everybody in the building supports. But because she's funding other things as a priority and cutting taxes and increasing tax credits, we're not able to take care of what she and everyone else agrees is a major priority for moving the state forward.
Any tax credit you want to single out that, I mean, is really hammering us? The wind tax credit's a big one, but are there others that you think are just?
I mean, not necessarily to go, we need to get rid of this one or that one. I think what we need to look at is we need to look at the growth of the tax credits. You look at over the last 4 or 5 years, you can pick out any of the 30 some odd tax credits we have, and most of them have exploded in their usage and in their growth. So what went from a $40 million hit is now a $400 million hit to the state budget. We need to look and say, are those tax credits creating jobs? I would think that they are. They may be maintaining jobs. They create them, then maintain them. When the tax credits go away, they start laying rigs down, and then we start losing jobs. So they maintain jobs. So I certainly want to do that. But we may need to look at future growth of those tax credits to say those companies that are here and using them now, maintain them, but allowing more folks to continue to grow them, but to continue to have access to them may not be the most prudent thing in this economic environment. So instead of coming in and saying, let's just cut the tax credits altogether, I think we may be more prudent to say, hey, these are good ones, and when times get better economically, we can look at opening them back up. But for now, let's let those folks who are taking advantage of them continue to do that. But let's sort of pace ourselves a little bit better moving forward, because taking hundreds of millions of dollars worth of hits in a variety of different tax credits is proving to be economically unworkable.
Would it be wise to slow down a little on the transportation funding and divert some money to public education?
Well, at this point, I think because of the 8-year plan and the way the jobs have been set out, I wouldn't support doing that. I think we need to get it done, and it's vitally important that we complete these transportation projects. It's also equally as important that we fund education properly. So what I would rather see is, instead of taking $60 million away from transportation, I'd say, how about that $50 million that's going to kick into the tax cut this year? How about you halt that and then use that $50 million to put back into public education? That way you can really have your cake and eat it too. It is frustrating for me to listen to the governor and the speaker say that we're going to do everything we can and put all options on the table to close this $600 million gap, except halting a $120 million tax cut. That makes no sense. I promise you, if you went out to even the most conservative of Republicans in the state of Oklahoma and said, do you think it's a wise idea to cut income taxes, which for the majority of Oklahomans is going to be a $40 or $50 annual benefit? Do you think it's wise to cut a $120 million income tax when we have a $600 million budget hole? Even the most conservative Republicans would have to say that's probably not very smart.
Well, Dorflinger used the restaurant analogy. Did you?
I haven't heard that. What was that?
A poor restaurateur increases his plate's costs at a time when his business is down to gain more money, but what he's really doing is driving customers away. And similarly, if we went ahead and foregone the tax cut, we're hurting business that way.
I respect Preston a lot, and I'm friends with him. I think the analogy is off base. I think when you look at the fact that the state of Oklahoma has one of the lowest tax burdens in the country, we are in much greater danger of running people off with poor schools, poor health care, and poor transportation funding or poor public safety funding than we ever are by rolling back a $50 annual tax cut. It's just not that. While the analogy may be an interesting one, I don't think it's applicable here.
How about the Apollo 13 analogy?
What was that? What was that one? Give me that.
It was full of the analogy.
We got a box of stuff to get this damn spaceship.
Oh.
They start
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely.
Take the round
Yeah.
piece in the square hole.
Yeah, but that box apparently doesn't include a $120 million tax cut. So that doesn't make any sense. So, no. So you can't tell the people of Oklahoma you're going to do everything within your power to close a $600 million budget hole, but not something that would immediately affect $120 million worth of that budget hole and not hurt anybody. No one would feel the effect. The tax cuts haven't kicked in yet, so you're not raising taxes on people at all. You just stop. The old adage, if he wants an analogy, right? The old adage is once you're in a hole, if you're trying to get out, stop digging. Well, that's what we're doing now. We're in a deep, deep hole, and what they do is they continue to layer on tax credits and tax cuts. That just pushes us deeper in the hole, and at some point, fiscal sanity has to reign, and we got to stop digging.